Suburban Sentinel here, along with Bella the camera cat. Today I'm finally getting to the long overdue part 3 on the series on box-fed magazines. This is a couple of weeks late because we were busy prepping for and subsequently being battered by Superstorm Sandy here in the New York City metropolitan area. Now, a little over a week after Sandy beat us up pretty good, we are getting a good old-fashioned nor'easter. Because of high winds and snow, all recovery efforts, at least around our neck of the woods here, have been suspended until further notice. So I'm taking this opportunity to make some videos as long as the power holds out. The death and destruction that these types of storms bring is a grim reminder of the fragile and transitory nature of everything in the material world. However, it is also a reminder of the eternal and indomitable nature of the spiritual world. We're just going to wait and see. As Doris Day sang in that 1958 Alfred Hitchcock classic, I can't remember the name of the movie anymore. Oh, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Que sera, sera. Right, Bella? Bella is still beaming with pride. Yesterday she got her first mouse. She's an adult but a relatively young cat who at this moment is biting my hands and scratching my fingers. So let's get to it. In part 1 of this series, we were discussing the mechanics of your typical box-fed magazines. And in the second part, we reviewed some of the myths about magazines, such as downloading and spring set. And we talked about Hooke's Law and some of that other crazy stuff. Here in part 3, let's get down to the real business of magazine maintenance. First, a philosophical word about equipment. And as far as I'm concerned, this applies to magazines and everything else. Personally, I want all equipment that I might potentially use to defend my family to be in tip-top condition at all times. That said, my purpose is not to go through life with absolutely pristine gear. I want to train with my gear and be able to use it to the very edges of its design operating envelope. I don't intentionally abuse my equipment. I just train with it to the best of my ability and maintain it meticulously. My goal as far as equipment maintenance is to ensure that it is 100% functional when needed. If my firearms or magazines get some dents or scratches in them, as long as they don't affect performance, I really don't care. Some people are very OCD about their guns and such, but unless you're a collector, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. As we discussed in parts 1 and 2, firearms magazines are not components that you would normally expect to last the life of the firearm. Magazines are generally what we refer to as a durable expendable, made to be used for a certain period of time or number of cycles and then either rebuilt or discarded and replaced. So let's get to the meat of this section by answering one simple but crucial question. Why do gun magazines fail or not run reliably? And let's look at this in detail. The first and often overlooked reason that magazines don't run correctly is due to poor design and/or manufacturing. Not all magazine manufacturers or magazines are created equal. Diving into my big book of truisms for a moment, in my opinion, life is too precious to count on crappy magazines. I have a great number of other truisms as well, such as life is too short to drink cheap liquor, but that's another story. So let's get back to the magazines. Just because magazines from different manufacturers look or appear to be the same doesn't mean that they are. The choice of materials, the engineering and production standards, and the quality control can all affect the reliability or longevity of a magazine. So how does one distinguish a good magazine from a crappy magazine? And I think the best way to do that is by reputation. For example, Glock OEM magazines have a very good reputation for reliability and durability. And that doesn't always mean that OEM magazines are the best. It is often true, but not necessarily. One of the best ways of finding good magazines is to go on the gun forums and YouTube for your specific weapon. And everybody has a section on magazines. And after a while, you should get a pretty good idea of who makes good magazines for your particular weapon. I know that buying magazines can become a very expensive proposition. For example, this Accurate Mag, which is kind of a hybrid, it's an aftermarket magazine for my .308 rifle, but it is made by and for the original manufacturer, is outrageous. That magazine here is $55 plus tax. But the bottom line is I'm not going to put my family's life at risk to save a few dollars on magazines. I'll cut corners somewhere else. Like having really crappy and unstylish clothes, as my wife complains about constantly. Enough about that, so let's move on to the second major reason that magazines fail or do not run reliably. Second major reason that magazines fail is impact damage. Magazines get dropped, thrown around, kicked, whatever. That's just the nature of the beast if you're training properly. Arguably the most vulnerable area of your standard box-type magazine are the feed lips. Let me get in a little closer. Again, for all you newbies out there, the feed lips are these curved portions of the magazine that serve two functions. One, the feed lips hold the stack of rounds in the magazine for future use. And second, the feed lips allows the bolt to strip off one round at a time to be fed into the chamber. Now these feed lips are somewhat susceptible to damage when the magazine is dropped, especially if it's dropped with a full load of ammunition. The feed lips can be bent, cracked, etc. A well-designed and well-built magazine will absorb a significant amount of punishment. I've dropped many of my magazines fully loaded on the feed lips. In some cases, the feed lips have been damaged. And when the feed lips do get damaged, my recommendation is to just toss the magazine. When the feed lips get bent, it can lead to feeding and cycling problems. Oftentimes people will try to bend them back into shape, which sometimes works, but will undoubtedly weaken the metal or whatever material the magazine happens to be made from. And to me, it's just not worth it. Magazines aren't that expensive. Although less common, dropping the magazine can also lead to structural impairment of the body or the base plate. Sometimes magazines will get dented up or stepped on, deforming the material or cracking it. In cases of real rough handling, what can happen is the magazine may not seat in the well of the firearm properly, or in extreme cases, major dents in the body of the magazine can impede performance of the spring cycling. I'm not saying that every little ding and dent or scratch in the magazine warrants replacement. I don't mean to say that at all. But if there is visible deformation or impeded function that's noticeable, I would certainly toss the magazine rather than leave it to chance. So magazines are susceptible to damage by rough handling. Does that mean I'm going to baby my magazines? Hell no, I want to train with them. These things are made to, or at least the good ones are made to sustain a certain amount of rough usage. God forbid there's some type of major event where you need your firearm and barbarians are at the gate. You're not going to take the time to release an empty magazine and wipe it down and tuck it gently into a nice holder or container. You're going to let it drop on the ground and hopefully jam a fresh mag into your firearm. I routinely just drop my magazines wherever they may happen to be in training because I don't want to develop the bad habit of taking the time to tuck my magazines away instead of staying in the fight. Will that policy of training as if it's for real, to the best of my ability, cost some money? Yeah, it's going to, because I'm going to replace some magazines. But to me, it's well worth the cost. Again, I'll skimp on clothes and hear my wife saying that I look like a bum, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm not saying to purposefully abuse the magazine. It's not as if when the mag is empty, I'm going to pull it out of the gun, slam it against a rock, jump up and down on it, and run it over with the car. But I do want to be realistic with the training. And the real situation is the mags are going to get tossed on the ground. So let's move on to the third reason why magazines either fail or become unreliable. Poor maintenance will kill your magazine. Indeed, magazines do require a certain amount of maintenance. In most cases, it's not a lot of maintenance, but it is an effort nonetheless. So what do we have to look out for? What are we maintaining it for? Well, the first thing that a magazine or most magazines are susceptible to is corrosion. This all-steel 308 magazine is, of course, susceptible to oxidation, being made of steel. And even this polymer magazine is subject to corrosion because the spring is made out of steel. Corrosion weakens all magazine springs. So that's the first thing you really want to be careful about, is allowing corrosion inside your magazines. Another maintenance issue, or at least another significant maintenance issue for magazines, is contamination. Gun oil, powder residue, carbon, dust, dirt, they can all get inside your magazine. These contaminants can impede the function of your magazine, and the contaminants themselves can actually attract moisture and more contaminants, thereby increasing the risk of a magazine-related failure. So the bottom line is you want to put your magazines on some type of maintenance schedule. And we'll talk about schedules and the mechanics of the maintenance itself a little later on in this video. So let's move on to our fourth reason why magazines fail. Misuse. Misuse or abuse, and again, I'm not talking about dropping the magazine on the ground for training. I'm talking about either intentional or negligent misuse of the magazine or use beyond its design capabilities. I've taken that PMag and just disassembled it quickly for example purposes. One major way of abusing your magazine is to load it beyond its design capability. Some people will find a way of loading 31 or 32 rounds in a 30-round magazine. And while you may be able to get the rounds to fit, what happens is the spring here is compressed beyond its design limitation. Overcompression can weaken the spring. My guess is that this often happens with aftermarket magazine extenders. Some companies will make an extender or adapter that's compatible with the body of the magazine and or the base plate that will give you an extension, allowing more rounds to be loaded. However, if the spring is not changed to an appropriate strength, or the existing spring is not designed to accommodate that extra force, that may lead to spring problems. So unless the firearm manufacturer sanctions the use of some sort of magazine extender, I would avoid them. I also understand and acknowledge that some people want the extender just to have extra length on a pistol magazine for greater comfort. And I think that's fine, but you can always just download the magazine and keep it at its original capacity as far as you're concerned, unless the manufacturer approves of the increased capacity. Another issue for magazine abuse is spring stretching. And we talked a bit about this in the last video when we addressed the issue and myths associated with spring set. Some folks think that because their magazine has been sitting loaded for a substantial period of time, it's a good idea to take the spring and stretch it out. In point of fact, that is a very bad idea. Stretching your spring beyond its normal at-rest configuration will weaken it. If you're inclined to stretch the spring because you're not getting enough force to feed your rounds reliably, chances are that either it's a different problem or the spring is just worn out and has not developed some sort of set. And I would refer you to the last video for a more detailed coverage of the issue of spring set. And that brings us to our final major reason why springs fail. All right, back again. Fifth major cause of magazine failure is simply ordinary wear and tear. All of these spring-loaded devices or compression spring devices are life limited. That means that each one of these springs will only withstand a certain number of cycles, that is, full compression and releases. The problem is I'm not aware of any firearm or magazine manufacturer that publishes the number of cycles their magazine or magazine springs are designed to withstand. Every gun and magazine manufacturer I contacted essentially say replace your magazine spring on condition. So essentially their theory is when the spring weakens such that the performance of your firearm is impacted, replace the spring. Now that's an easy out for the manufacturer, but that response to me is somewhat lacking. First, I don't want to change the spring on condition. If your firearm is strictly a range gun, that's fine. But a defensive gun, you want your magazines and all the other components and accessories in your firearm to be 100% when they're most needed. And you know how Murphy's Law works. Things are bound to fail when you need them the most. So I don't want to wait for a problem before I accomplish normal or routine maintenance on the item to keep it running at a high degree of functionality. The second reason that change on condition is kind of a lousy way to go is that it's not that easy to diagnose. If the gun stops feeding properly, there are a myriad of reasons it may do so. It could be magazine related, it could be ammunition related, it could be a problem with the weapon itself. So now you're stuck diagnosing the problem with the weapon. In my opinion, the better course of action is to replace the spring or discard the magazine before it gets to the point of being worn out. I had planned on getting into maintenance schedules and rebuild schedules and strategies in this video, but Mother Nature is not quite cooperating. The winds are really picking up and the snow is falling at a pretty good clip, and I'm starting to hear trees, presumably ones that were weakened or damaged by Sandy, starting to come over in the distance. So I'm going to go get my prep stuff out now before the weather gets even worse, and then I'm having to do this in the dark. So I guess I'll make this a 4-part video. So in part 4 of 3, we'll get to magazine maintenance and rebuild schedules. So thanks for watching. I encourage all of you to prep. We've seen around here in the New York metropolitan, or the greater New York metropolitan area, essentially an area around 50-mile radius around Manhattan, what happens to those who are not prepared. And I'll tell you, certain things have gotten ugly, like there's been a shortage of available fuel, not because the fuel's not there, but because the stations are not able to pump it without electricity, and those who didn't store some extra fuel are in big trouble. And it's causing a lot of chaos. This is the Suburban Sentinel. Hopefully I'll get to part 4 of 3 very soon, if the weather cooperates and the electricity stays on. So all of you out there, please shoot safely, and all of my brothers and sisters in the greater New York metropolitan area, coastal southern New England, keep your chin up. We'll get through this one way or another.